Okay. Well, let's rock and roll. Okay. Hello, ladies. Hello, gentlemen. Welcome to the Center for Civil Society's webinar on strategic development planning. We are recording on Tuesday, March 10th. I'm Jack Fowler. I'm on the East Coast. Beautiful day here in Milford, Connecticut. And I have two great experts. Sorry, guys, you are not only experts, you're great experts in the arts of strategic planning and especially strategic development planning. That's James Davenport and Jason Lloyd. So let me tell you about them. James is an AmFIL director who works in the Philadelphia area bureau, Conshohocken. I think I've said that correctly. And he's
That's
led
it.
numerous strategic planning projects, strategic organizational, strategic development for various nonprofit organizations. And so has Jason Lloyd, who's an AmFIL senior director, and he anchors the Phoenix Bureau, which serves numerous Southwest nonprofits. By the way, AmFIL and the Center for Civil Society have a common interest. We want to strengthen civil society. So our objective here in this webinar is simple. We hope to give nonprofit leaders, those who are maybe you're anxious, dubious, you're eager, you're inquisitive. By the way, dubious was not an insult. We want to give you an understanding of the value and importance of strategic planning and the process, but mostly of strategic development planning. What is a plan? Why do one? How do you do one? What's the consequence of not doing one? How do you execute one? How long is a plan's duration? What are things to watch out for in a planning process? I think these are the broad topics we will try to address here in the hour that we have. And we're doing so because we believe that some of these, or all of these, are the concerns on the minds of many of those who are participating and watching this webinar, watching it live. If you're watching it live, you can ask questions somewhere on the bottom of the Zoom screen. Yeah, I see there's a Q&A function. So if you click on it, ask your question. I'll try to keep on top of them and pose your questions in the time we have. So thank you for joining us. And I am senior fellow at the Center for Civil Society. I write Civil Thoughts, the free weekly email newsletter for the center. Go to civilthoughts.com and sign up. I think I'm done with the commercials now. Let's get asking some questions. And I'm going to start off with Jason Lloyd. Jason, because of your seniority, I have to ask you the first question. So tell us a little about what is a strategic plan, because that's a generic term. But what's a strategic plan, and what particularly is a strategic development plan?
Yeah, no, thank you, Jack, and thank you for having us. A strategic plan is, think of it as a comprehensive roadmap that defines an organization's mission, vision, and long-term goals. A strategic development plan then builds on top of that to build out its fundraising strategy to really maximize an organization's effectiveness. A good plan acts as a practical guide that not only outlines actionable steps, but also provides a framework for allocating resources and avoiding distractions. That last piece, I think, is super important because a good plan is one where you're really trying to make sure that you are focused on the right things and not just distracted.
Well, I assume there are lots of distractions that can come up in a process. We're going to ask you about hiccups, bumps in the road, and all those things later on. James, I have a proclivity to be negative. I don't know why I am. It's just the way I was born. But it's not too philosophical. If this is not too philosophical a point, James, tell us what a strategic development plan is not, or what would it be wrong for nonprofit to assume of a strategic development plan. There could be people that have it, do it, it's done, and then they're like, wait a minute, I thought you were going to give us the winning lottery numbers or something. Like, what is a strategic development plan not, from your experience?
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, a couple things I'll say here. I mean, one, I think the temptation, especially with development planning, is to see it as just a path to more, right? That a successful strategic development plan just says we're going to do more, right? We're going to raise 5 million this year, 6 million next year, 7 million next year, so on and so forth. And I've often seen leaders approach a strategic development plan with that mindset. But the problem with that, right, is it doesn't answer the why behind the growth that you want to see. So There's a great book on strategy called Playing to Win that I think people should check out and read. But one of the authors of that has a great quote about strategic decisions, strategic choices that you need to make within a strategic planning effort. And what he says is that it's a strategic decision if the opposite would also be a good idea. So what does he mean by that? Let me just
Yeah,
draw that
yeah.
a little bit. My father worked for 33 years for Stroman Bakeries, if you're familiar with Stroman Bakeries. So I always use the bread company as the example here. It would not be a strategic decision. It would not be a strategic choice for the bread company to say, we're going to sell more bread, right? Because the opposite of that would be a very bad idea. We're going to sell less bread. Not a good idea for the business, right? But the bread company could say, hey, you know what? We're going to sell more. We're going to lean into whole wheat bread, or we're going to lean into gluten-free bread because we think that after having done some analysis and heard some feedback, that's our unique strength, right? So we're going to lean into that. Because the opposite, leaning into selling white bread, could also be a good idea, right? And so that's the strategic development plan, a strategic plan in general, is not simply a path to more, just sort of draw the line up and to the right, but rather you need to make very careful decisions about the why, the how, what it means to win, what would actual success look like, and why is that success?
Well, I'm going to keep with you here, James.
Yeah.
Jason, I'm going to come back to you and ask you about the actual planning process. What does that mean? But James, let me stick with you because,
Mhm.
and we won't talk too much about organizational plans, but I have to believe in doing a strategic development plan. You're somehow not you're addressing more than just numbers. You're addressing mission a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
if you have a if you're engaged in creating a strategic development plan, I assume it behooves the organization to also have a strategic organizational plan. So anyway, let's take these. You have these two things. Do they complement each other? Do they amplify each other? Does a strategic development plan really help an organization that also has a strategic organizational plan?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The two certainly can interact quite a bit. And I think that the most successful development plans that I've been a part of are anchored by a really strong organization-wide why, right? We're
Yeah.
going in this direction, right? We've mapped a programmatic, a mission-oriented end point that we're getting to, right? Whatever your mission might be. You've made strategic decisions to sell whole grain bread, right? Not just sell whole wheat bread. And then you can take it and say, okay, well, how are we going to fund this thing, right? How are we going to get there? And you need to make the same strategic choices when you're doing a development plan because there are some organizations that have unique strengths in the mail. There are some organizations that have unique strengths in major gifts or planned giving or whatever it may be, and have unique gaps in those areas too that can be filled. So at the same time, it's not just saying we're going to raise more money, right? But we're gonna raise money by filling in the gaps that we have, leveraging the strengths that we have, and making those strategic decisions for what is actually going to advance that overall organizational goal. So yeah, you have to know where the organization is going in order to know how much money you need to raise.
Jack, if I may, I want
Yeah.
to, James, I love that point, and I'm reminded one of the best NFL coaches of all time, Vince Lombardi, said, "Hope is not strategy,"
Yeah.
and I think all too often with the leaders I work with, it's transformational work with the groups that Amphil works with, and they're transforming lives, transforming communities, and it's amazing. But oftentimes the leaders, I think, err on the side of that hope of just hoping for a better future, and strategic planning process really allows them to sink their teeth in and go, what does that mean? What does strategy actually mean for my organization to do more of its mission? And it's a beautiful process.
Yeah.
Um, Jason, sticking with you, I want to ask you about what it means to do a plan, and there's a prejudice here. I mean, you do that for as a third party for clients, right? We use a lot of air quotes here, but I mean, a plan doesn't have to be done by Amphil, it can be done internally, but we'll get to that later. What,
Yeah.
the differences, internal or external, but regardless of who does it, what does it mean to do a plan?
Yeah. To do a plan, it means that you need to define where are you now and where do you want to go, and then mapping the in between, how you get there. A fourth step might be reporting on the progress because things change. But so 4 steps. First is, where are you now as an organization? Where's your fundraising now? Where do you want to go? What does your mission require of you? Do you need to raise 3 million over the next 3 years, 5 million, 10 million, whatever that is? And then how are you going to get there? James, you hit on, some organizations are really primed for direct mail. Others are primed for major gifts. I think this is also dependent upon the life cycle of the organization. If you're in idea phase, kind of launch area, that's probably going to be a major gift strategy or growth mode, versus organizations that are 3, 5, 10 million in annual philanthropic revenue. Those fundraising strategies become more robust and more integrated, more comprehensive, if you will.
Let me pose that again, in a different way also, and James, maybe you address it, and Jason also. Don't give away secret sauce if you don't want to, but I'm Organization X. I'm hiring you to do this strategic development plan. I'm paying you money to do it. What are you actually doing?
Yeah.
So that's like what I'm working with you. But as I'm observing you do this plan, what am I seeing you do?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jack. A couple things I would call it. So Jason sort of had that four-piece structure, right? So this first
Right.
piece, where are we now, right? And what does that actually look like? What does that entail? Well, that's both quantitative and qualitative, right? So there's going to be some numbers we're going to run, especially if it's a development-specific plan. We want to see donor retention. We want to see year-over-year growth. We want to see, lapsed donors, upgrades, downgrades, all of this stuff, right? We want to really kind of sink our teeth into the program and get a good sense of the file, get a good sense of the history of the file. In addition to that, we're going to spend a lot of time reading your direct mail letters, talking to your major gifts officers about what solicitations look like, speaking with your donors, right? We're going to conduct interviews with your donors to really get a sense of, why do they give to XYZ nonprofit, right? What do they think is the most important thing? What stands out to them? What are challenges they've faced in that? And getting that unfiltered feedback allows us to eventually put together an assessment, right? And that assessment is sort of that first piece. We bring that assessment together. And then from there, with our client, we facilitate a process to map out that landmark goal, right? Where do they want to go, right? That's the next piece Jason was talking about. And then once we know where they want to go, it's easier to map back, okay, and how are we going to get there? What are the actual actions that need to take place to achieve that strategic choice? And so then we're into the nitty gritty of who does what, by when, reporting back how, and all of that sort of stuff, right? That's going to be much more sort of practical day to day. Joe's going to, be working major donors in a new way, and Alice is going to be running this direct mail program over here. And then checking in on it later on, right? Is you want to be regularly checking in on that plan. Sometimes we're involved in that. Sometimes that's the client doing it themselves. But that regular check-in on the progress of the plan is a very important part.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a little more depth a little later.
Okay.
I want to remind folks, you want to ask a question, click the little question thing. I will pose it for you. So, Jason, would you, and you, James, also, after Jason answers, would you discuss a plan process that you led or are deeply engaged in that you hold to have been a particular success? Not only the outcome, the plan, the thing you created for the client, but for the fruits that it bore. I don't know if you can, if don't say names if you don't want, use Acme or whatever, be anonymous if you need to be. But can you tell us about any of your own experiences in successful planning?
Yeah, there's one, James, if you don't mind, I'll jump in
Yeah.
first. I think Jack gave me the baton, but if not, I'm sorry. There's one group, this was a few years ago, worked closely with a colleague, Anthony Mazza, on this plan for an organization that had been around for probably 30 years, if I remember correctly. There was a new leader, and she stepped in as a CEO, coming from another nonprofit in the area, and they were really trying to help. This organization was trying to help seniors in the Arizona, specifically Maricopa landscape. And they kind of, as an organization, hit a plateau. And so, as a new leader, the CEO, was wanting to set a vision of where she thought the organization could be successful and ultimately the impact that they could have in 3, 5 years out. And so, working closely with this CEO, she had developed an organizational plan and now was ready to map on a fundraising strategic plan on top of it. And so it was really great to, in the assessment process, to in the interviews, hear feedback from the donors themselves who were supporting this organization and seeing the impact of their work, but also hearing the challenges that this organization was facing from a donor perspective of burnout, what we often call burnout or fatigue, and helping the CEO address and think through how does the organization actually set itself up for the long run. And so through the planning process, in short, we were able to develop some really good major gift strategies. And I think they're on year 3 of their plan, and ran into them a few weeks ago. And they said that they're still very much on track with all the goals that we laid out. And it's very exciting to see that growth.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
And byproduct of that is the strengthening of civil society.
Yeah.
James, do you have any greatest hits you want to share?
Yeah, one that I would call out is an organization that I've been blessed to work with for a while now, and Amphil did a strategic plan for them just about 5 years ago now. It was a 5-year plan, and that we're coming right to the end of it now. And what's been really cool to see is the organization made some specific strategic decisions programmatically that impacted fundraising, right? And so we needed to, of course, raise the dollars to account for those programmatic changes. And we're on year 5, and we are set and on our way to actually hitting that year 5 goal, which is something like, if my numbers are going to be slightly incorrect, but directionally true. I think we were at 6.5 when we started, and we're going to close this year at 10.5 or 11. So it's a big change. And that big revenue change has allowed them to execute these programs, which are making a huge impact. The specific program that was a really big part of this strategic plan, this journalism program, is sort of setting the organization apart now, right, as a very important institution in their space, which has been really exciting to see.
I want to paint with a big and obnoxious brush here. How can I help it be obnoxious? Can we imagine General Eisenhower having no strategic plan on D-Day, or even if he had one, not executing it? So this is my backing into what are the principal consequences of a nonprofit not having and not embracing a strategic plan, and especially not having a strategic development plan, or having one and not embracing it, which we'll get into it deeper a little more later. But what's the consequence of that, Jason?
Yeah, I'm reminded of Ben Franklin had a quote: by failing to prepare, we prepare to fail. And so by not having a plan, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And what I mean by that is, and let's tie it back to James, what you shared, which is we have 2 really good choices that we need to make, and either one could be good in of themselves. And as leaders, we want to strive for excellence. So we will do whatever we're doing with excellence. But if it turns out that we should have made this other decision, this more strategic decision, we will have failed by diverting our effort, our excellent effort, in this subpar answer to the problem that we're trying to address. And so you could spend 3 years trying to build out your direct mail strategy, when in reality, 3 years of investment on major gifts would yield higher returns, and you could hire more staff and see greater impact in your organization.
Okay. I want to present a scenario. Organization X, or Acme Nonprofit, has been around for decades. It's known in its space. It raises tens of millions of dollars annually, but it never had a strategic plan of any kind, not organizational, not development. If you could have a frank, no feelings hurt conversation over a beer or Diet Coke, whatever, with the leadership of this organization, what would you tell them about their not having a plan? Would you tell them what is the opportunity cost of that? James, do you want to take that? And
Yeah.
then Jason, if you want to
Yeah.
tag on.
Yeah, happy to, Jack. I mean, I think to put it simply, right, you're leaving, set aside money on the table, you're leaving programmatic impact on the table, right? If the leaders we work with at nonprofits didn't get into nonprofit work to be fundraisers, right? They got into nonprofit work because they love the mission, whatever it is, right? They want to see that change in the world that the organization aspires to. And by not having a strategic plan, you leave those things on the table. Why? Because which direction are you going, right? If you haven't defined that, right? If you're going, if you haven't defined the direction you're going, you don't know really where you're going. You're just sort of attempting to go up and to the right. And I think the other side effect of this is that I think the organizations, like the organization you described, Jack, I've sometimes seen this sort of thing, and it usually involves a very hard driving CEO who knows where he or she wants to go, right? They know where they're going. But the question is, do your staff know? Does your leadership know? Does your board know where you want to go? And are they aligned in that direction? Are they just sort of checking boxes as they follow you where they're going? Or are they really investing in the direction of the organization? And that difference between having a plan that everyone is aligned on and headed in the same direction versus one that is sort of just hard charging CEO is at the front of the pack, taking the organization in a specific direction is a very, very big difference.
Yeah. Well, both can be successful. One
Both
can
can be successful to a point.
Yeah.
I think you're going to have much more success if you have a line.
Jason, anything to add before I throw another question at you? I'm happy.
No, well, maybe one thing, and that is we all wear different hats. As in my time in development in an organization, I wore many different hats, and the leaders that we work with wear many different hats. And it is always exciting to see groups who are successful without a strategic plan. James, I think, captured it perfectly. And what I would want to ask these leaders is imagine what more you could do with this alignment and with this momentum that you can generate by helping your staff know their seat on their bus and how they can do their job well. And so it's really how do you use this as a launch pad rather than just kind of being stuck with the status quo where they're at.
Okay. Yeah. For both of you, but for you first, Jason, and this may be there are three questions in this one, but the first one might be just too vague. How does a strategic development plan succeed? How can it fail? And would you talk about, I think it's kind of related about, buy-in. Who at the Acme nonprofit really must be part of the plan, or at least of the planning process? I assume everyone should be part of the execution, if there is an execution. But so how does one succeed? How does it fail? What are the prime people that need to have buy-in on it? You first, Jason.
Yeah, I appreciate this question. And I would say the success and failure are dependent upon one thing, and that is, does this plan actually get acted upon? And if it doesn't, that plan is going to fail. And so James, I usually break this into 3 steps, but I welcome if you might add to this. To ensure that action happens, I really boil it down to 3 clear actions. And that is, first, are there clear goals and tasks for the plan? Secondly, is there clear ownership? This is what we call a playbook. Who is doing what by when, reporting back how, making sure that everyone is talking back and forth. So what I am responsible for bubbles up to James and vice versa, and we can actually tag team it. So second one is creating clear ownership. And then finally, clear reporting. This last piece, I think, can easily be put on the back burner and or completely forgotten, which is how are we doing in relationship to our goals and our objectives. If we're on track, great. If we're not on track, why is that? What boulders need to be removed? what bridges need to be built, and do we maybe need to change some of the goals and objectives so that we ultimately hit our landmark goal?
Yeah.
James, I have a question for you, but actually, I just got a question from Carl, the great Carl. I love Carl. Well, I don't know which Carl it is, old Carl, new Carl. Carl asks, are specific campaign strategies structured and executed differently than overall organizational strategies? So
Mm.
it's old Carl. He should know better. Are specific campaign strategies structured and executed differently than overall organizational strategies? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it does. Of course it does, Carl.
Yeah, let me put it this way. I think that the process might be a little different, especially as you in the way that you're conducting. I mentioned interviews earlier as a key piece of the assessment, right? Some of that assessment phase is going to look very similar. But one of the things that's going to look different in the interviews is that if you're going after a capital campaign to raise, let's say you're a nonprofit that raises $5 million a year and you're going to run a $25 million capital campaign, a $20 million capital campaign, something like that. You're specifically looking in those interviews for how much do we think we're going to raise here, right? A feasibility study or a planning study as opposed to just a strategic assessment.
Right.
So that the tenor of those interviews is going to change a little bit because you're looking for gift indications, right? You're looking for how much do we believe is reasonable here. In with regard to the setting the actual strategy, I don't think it changes that much in terms of there are still strategic choices that need to be made. There's a lot of ways to raise $20 million in a 3-year period or a 4-year period or 5-year period. Your institution needs to make decisions about what are the best ways given your strengths and weaknesses, right? So that part I don't think really changes. The language is going to change a little bit. Some of the context is going to change a little bit. The action steps are going to be a little different because they're going to be tied to, we got to keep the annual fund running. We got to get the campaign dollars in the door. But I want to make sure I'm answering the question specifically. Are the specific campaign strategies structured and executed differently than overall organizational strategies? I guess the short answer is a little bit, but not the strategic choice making process doesn't change that much.
Okay. I have some other questions here from, I have an Elizabeth and an Elizabeth, two questions, but I want to ask one or two more prior, and then I'll get to these questions. Thanks, folks, for submitting. James, we were talking, and I've heard you and Jason talk about plans that are bottom up, and then there are those that are top down. Would you explain the difference, and is one more preferable to the other?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jack. And it gets a little bit more specifically to what I mentioned earlier. So a top-down plan, if I'm going to define a top-down plan, this is a plan that the CEO writes, right, or the board writes, and then hands down to the staff. This sort of plan might have all of the correct answers. It might take into account many different things and has all the correct answers, but I would argue it is less effective over time than a bottom-up plan. And so bottom-up planning really is doing that assessment, that where are we now piece with your team, right? Really making sure you understand the facts on the ground. What do our direct mail results really look like? What are responses like? What are donors saying in meetings? All of that kind of stuff is the type of information you're going to get from a bottom-up plan. Moreover, I would make the argument, and Jason, push back on me if you disagree, but I would make the argument that a plan that there's alignment around from leadership and staff is always going to be more effective than a top-down plan, because you're going to have that ownership, right? People are not going to feel like, oh, this is Jack's plan and I'm just running it. Right?
Imposed on me. Right.
This is our plan, right? And we are all bought in the direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does make sense. And I'm going to build off of that a little bit because I think sometimes I will find, and even the board, one of the boards that I serve on, the board is pretty, or used to be pretty involved with the strategic planning process. And that's partly because our role as board was that of staff to a certain degree. And with the life cycle of this nonprofit, it was a rather small nonprofit. As the organization grows and as your board fills its legal and fiduciary role, the board's role needs to be overseeing the CEO and not as in the weeds as sometimes boards can get. And so, James, to your point, I think groups that the bottom up, when there is clear consensus and commitment at the leadership level of a nonprofit, that then gets presented to a board, it's really beautiful to see that take place.
So, Elizabeth K, I'm not going to give last names away here, but Elizabeth K asks, I'd appreciate hearing you speak about some of the strategic planning that may be specific to educational institutions, higher education, as well as K through 12. Jason or
Yeah.
James, have either of you had experience in such? And if you have, is there a good answer? Is there a
Yeah.
clear answer? Go ahead.
I'll take a quick pass on this one. And the quick pass is yes, AMPhil works in lots of different sectors. I have done a lot of work in the education space, both K through 12 as well as higher education, both the private and public universities. And what I would say is in the education space, the principles don't change, but the focus on fundraising strategies might be slightly different, and it really depends on the size of your organization. But so what do I mean by principles? First, the principles is relational fundraising is what leads to your highest ROI. That's going to hold true no matter what sector you're in, and very much in education, K through 12 and higher ed. Where there are some nuances and some changes is kind of where are you fishing for those donors, and where are you going to allocate your resources best. Direct mail tends to have a better ROI with families, depending on your school size, with your families and with your development staff. And then secondly, with your major gift strategies, sometimes there's a higher emphasis that you can place on alumni as well as legacy giving in those spaces.
Okay. Let me throw this out, and then we have a question from Elizabeth C. I'll get to that, but we mentioned capital campaigns before, James. I think you did, and you hear it all the time. We want to do a mission campaign. We want to do a capital campaign. Small, even very tiny organizations. Can a nonprofit achieve real success? I guess anyone can achieve success, but can really achieve success with a capital campaign or a mission campaign without having a strategic development plan?
That's a great question, Jack. I think they can. I think the best capital campaigns that I've been a part of, or mission campaigns that I've been a part of, have been grounded in that organizational strategy, right? So, how often have you been in a boardroom, right? And we're talking about the fundraising at the institution, and someone says, "Well, maybe we should run a capital campaign," and that sort of idea tends to come up, right? And I think the more you can tie the reason for a capital campaign, the reason for a mission campaign, the reason for what is really at its essence a big fundraising push to the strategic initiatives of the organization, the more success you're going to have. Your board's going to be more bought into it. Your donors are going to be more bought into it. Your staff are going to be more bought into it. And you're gonna have a higher percentage chance of success. I'm working on a campaign. We're wrapping up a study right now and launching into a campaign for an organization where this is exactly the case, right? They spent a year, 2 years working with them on major gifts to really sort of build up their major gifts work. And while they're doing that, they're writing a strategic plan for the institution under a new leader. And that new leader put forth his strategic plan that was, that he built with his team. And that now is fueling a capital campaign, which is going to make a big, big difference for that institution because it's grounded in the strategy that there's alignment around.
Okay. I'm going to get to a question by Elizabeth C. and then Jeff W. But first to Jason. These stories of we did a strategic plan, the development plan, right? And then they're in a binder in the CEO's office. And if you go grab it, you're going to have to blow dust off it. So would you discuss the how-tos of executing a strategic development plan, organizational if you want, but I'm trying to focus on developmental. And is there a tested system or a process that can be employed to see that a plan is really enacted and that it just
Yeah.
doesn't sit in a binder?
Yeah. What gets tracked gets done, right? And this is where KPIs are essential. And so making sure that when the plan is finished, that you have the right key performance indicators in place. And tying back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, the reporting piece. This is when you know who is doing what and by when and reporting back how, that is crucial. But you need to also build in time and set time on your calendar to actually report on progress and check in and go, is this actually getting done? How is it getting done? Are we on track? Are we behind track? And so there's a tool that we call at Amphil a 3x3 process. And James, correct me if I am getting this wrong here, but it's 30 minutes a month that a person in your playbook, you will review your playbook at least 30 minutes a month and go, am I on track? Am I behind schedule? Am I completely off the rails? Then once a quarter, the director of development will spend about 3 hours a quarter doing the same thing for everyone's playbooks. And then 3 days a year is that final step in the 3x3. 3 days a year as a development team, your leadership will be looking at your strategy that plan that you put in place. How are you doing with traction towards your goals and objectives?
That's done in Las Vegas or Nashville, correct?
Yes, somewhere fun, ideally.
Okay. All right. Elizabeth C has a question. Jason, I'm going to stick with you, and then after that, I'm going to go back to James. A simple question: how do grants fit into planning, as they're not a guarantee?
Yes, no, and funny enough, I was asked this question 2 weeks ago, and that's one of the most difficult things with grant writing in grants being a strategy for your organization is you don't know. You might be applying for 1.5 million in grants and only receive 200,000 in a given year, and so that's short answer is that you probably don't want your sole strategy for fundraising to be dependent upon grants. And that's one of those strategic choices that needs to be made and factored into your estimates.
Yeah,
James,
I would just,
go ahead, James.
I just echo that and say, totally agreed, right? They're not predictable, nor are major gifts, right? And nor is direct mail. And so that's why it's important to really take a holistic look at like, how are we going to build this program overall and make
Yeah.
strategic decisions around that?
Yes. And one thing I need to say, I've worked with several organizations that are primarily funded by grants.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's what I mean by great is it has helped the organization scale from startup to 1.5 million, but then there's this friction point of going, okay, how do we actually diversify our revenue sources? So it's always a challenge.
Yeah.
I have two questions, then we're going to get to Jeff W's. Continue to ask folks if you want. I've several. We'll get through the hour with questions. Tell me about. I'm going to truncate this. Why should a nonprofit consider hiring a third party to take on and perform the task of a strategic development plan? Because I have to assume an organization can do one, and they have done one, and it's possible they do them well, use it with their staff and their directors without the need of experts. Experts being now a curse word in America, but what's the virtue of having a third party do this on behalf of a nonprofit?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy to take that one, Jack. A couple things that I would point to. I think one of the most important pieces, right, is a third party can help an organization, especially organization leadership, get outside of itself a little bit, right, and look objectively at where you are. Not only in the quantitative, right, looking at numbers, running numbers, anyone can run numbers, but also the qualitative, right? What are we really hearing from donors and all of that? I think one of the quantitative pieces of development plans are wonderful, and they teach you a lot, and they can bring up some obvious gaps. That, I hadn't thought about that because we hadn't run that specific number before. But the qualitative side of the interviews piece of the assessment is really, really important. And one thing I've been shocked by, I've had occasion where a donor, they say, oh, interview so and so, he's a great friend of the organization, he'd be happy to talk to you about this. And he has some critical feedback to share that he's never shared with the organizational leadership before, but he feels comfortable sharing it with a third party. And that can be really impactful because it opens up a blind spot for the organization that they didn't know about, and they may never have learned from their donor.
Okay. I want to make a note that Jack M has sent an inquiry, and Jack M should write me if he wants. jfowler@amphil.com. There you go. And Jason, let me propose Jeff W.'s question. Hello. He even says he knows old Carl. He writes, often the emerging nonprofit finds itself pretty deep into the consequence of ready, fire, aim before they realize they need more of a plan. How do you balance getting back on the rails while also trying to retroactively build the foundation? Example, maybe they have a 3-month cash window. There's not a lot of time to put all the ducks in a row before they just need to go out and get after it.
Yeah, and the quick answer here is we do not, any leader should not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I think it can be easy to get caught up. The reverse can be true to one of your first questions, Jack, which is organizations can be so fraught with getting out and actually doing and stuck with this urgency or need to plan. And the reality is you need to have money in the door to pay the overhead, to pay the salaries of everyone in your organization. So it's a both and. And how to balance it is going, okay, what is reasonable and actionable in this season? And you heard me in the 3x3 process. The very few organizations actually are able to devote 3 days a year to focus solely on their fundraising activities. It's a sad reality. I think if more did, there would be higher ROI and those types of things. But really trying to apply it to your situation and where you're finding yourself. Usually the situation that Jeff is mentioning, I find with groups and organizations that are in the idea phase of a life cycle, maybe even in the early growth phase. And there it's really trying to make sure that you block 1 or 2 times a year out to think strategically so that you're focusing your efforts to the best of your ability.
I think there is a general prejudice institutionally leaders against having to focus on development. Yeah, and
a prejudice. And I've also even heard it said, it's your job to get money. I am here doing the mission. And I think that's a sad understanding of what fundraising is. Ultimately, a good culture of generosity, good culture of philanthropy is one that is deeply integrated into your programs, that shows the gratitude of the work being done. So
yeah, people should Google Henry Nouwen's The Spirituality of Fundraising, get a little religion on that. James, let me ask you a question. Jeff's question raised derailing. So from your experience or knowledge, tell us a common problem or problems that arise in a planning process once it's already begun. And I'm asking this because there are people watching this live now or who will be watching it and who will be involved in a strategic planning process. And I think they deserve to know possibly some of the common things that might come up amidst the investigation part of the process. Anyway, what's your experience?
A few things come to mind here for me. I mean, there are some I don't want to call them simple ones, but some quick ones that you might expect me to say, right? Staff turnover, right, would be one. If a member of the team leaves during the course of a strategic plan, right, that's tough. I think there are some that are preventable that come up far too often, right? Things that are within our control. And one of those is unassigned items, right? We realize, we never assigned that thing that everyone was sort of avoiding, but we all knew we needed to do, right? Like that can end up causing you problems down the line. Also, just echo a point I made earlier, the lack of staff ownership and buy-in, right? Like not having that is going to cause you problems down the line. And then I think one big thing is making the perfect the enemy of the good, right? I
Right.
think this often manifests itself as inertia, right? Um, Actions won't be taken unless they can be taken in an absolutely perfect way. And unfortunately, there are no perfect actions, right? And so we need to think hard and clear, or let me rephrase that. Should you think hard and clear about your plans? Of course you should. But also the doing strategic planning well requires courage and it requires a willingness to get up and go, right? And so, and you're gonna run into things that, oh, we thought this was gonna work and it didn't work, but because we're checking in on the plan regularly, we can pull it back before it's a total pitfall and then achieve the goal in a different way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I have a bunch of basic questions that I think would be on most people's minds on the how, where, etc. But um, since we had the interesting question about education, nonprofit difference, let me ask this. Nonprofits, they come in all shapes, sizes, tenures. Are there any differences between the scope and scale of a strategic development plan for, say, a relatively young nonprofit with limited resources versus a 10-figure annual revenue religious nonprofit celebrating its 100th anniversary? Some of who don't have strategic development plans, right? What are any significant differences, or is everything fundamentally the same?
The- I'll take the first pass on this, and the principles are the same, and that is think back to those four steps. Where are you now? Where do you want to go? How do you get there? And then how do you report on it? Those same principles apply no matter if you're $50,000 to $50 million. Now, the that spectrum can the strategies and the infrastructure and the tasks, the objectives can get quite complex the more philanthropic revenue that an organization has, and with that the more time that it takes. So it maybe there is a scale that would correlate those two. Anyways, that's how I'd
Okay.
do a first pass.
James, you have an opinion on that?
I would add that I think Jason is exactly correct, right? The principles are always the same. The particulars can be very different and more complex in the larger organizations. I think also one thing with older organizations, right, that have been around a long time, they've been fundraising the same way for a long time. Big changes in strategy for an institution that's been reliant on mail for 50 years and hasn't done much major gifts it's going to be more complex to make that change, right? It's going to be a harder turn versus an organization who's newer, has been fundraising, but doesn't have a sort of their donor base isn't formed to a particular style of solicitation or things like that, where you can pivot and move a little more nimbly.
One thing, Jack, that came to mind here is oftentimes leaders, and these are usually new leaders to an organization. I often hear them ask either directly or indirectly, implicitly, explicitly, for silver bullets. They want the
Right.
quick fix for fundraising. They see the need for their work, and rightly so. They have more lives that they need to save, that they need to change. And so they're coming to Amphil, they're coming to me asking, okay, well, how do I get more money faster? And that's to answer that question out the gate, the principles, it's doing the small things consistently well over time that leads to the highest ROI. No brilliant strategic plan is going to speed that process up. The principles still stay the same.
Jason, you are ignoring the winning Powerball ticket strategy. So I'm going to ask some basic questions in a minute, but we have one, I don't know if it's the last one, but I have a question from Anonymous. I'm going to ask it anyway. As someone new to strategic development for my organization, what are some pieces of practical advice for searching for brand new donors from scratch?
Hmm.
I have to charge you for this answer, Anonymous.
Yeah.
James, I was doing a luncheon where someone just asked this question, and so I'll do a first pass on it and you can fill in. But the one of the hurdles that oftentimes fundraising leaders face is a hesitancy to ask. and not ask for money, but just ask. And so, where do you find new donors? It's constantly asking people you meet with, who do you know that should know about the work that I am doing? It's not our role as fundraising leaders to convince or persuade someone to give to our organization. It's to actively listen and hear the passion that's on their hearts for what they're interested in. And if it's our work, great. If it's not, you bless and release and you move on. So where do you find more donors? You start with your board. You ask the board with who do they know that you should be meeting with? Should start with your church, any community organizations that you're involved with, asking people who do they know that should know about your work. And through doing that, you'll start to find new leads and new prospects. And there's lots of ideas around cold strategy. James, I don't know if you want to take any of those, but that's my first pass.
Yeah, I mean, one thought that comes to mind here for me is obviously my answer to the question would change drastically depending on the life cycle of the organization, right? If it's a brand new, fresh organization, I think like sort of going to things and meeting people, right, is going to be a really great strategy for a community organization trying to round up new donors. But if you're new to development and you're working in a nonprofit that's raising $10 million a year or something like that, and you don't have an acquisition mail program, right, that's something you got to look into, because despite, what some people like to say about mail, it's still the best way to acquire aligned donors at scale. And so, acquisition mail, digital acquisition, those are both great. I think with regard to cold calling, right, what I always think about with finding new cold major donor prospects, where I don't have an intro, but I know they gave to, 3 or 4 organizations like my own in a major giving kind of way. I'm looking for that, right? I'm looking for affinity, capacity, and accessibility. So with regard to affinity, you want to find people that have demonstrated charitable affinity, right? Meaning if I work for, an organization that serves serves children, feeds children in Africa, I'm going to look at other organizations that feed children in Africa and find donors who have given to those organizations, given major gifts to those organizations. Capacity, right? They need to be major gifts given to those organizations, not just any gift given to that organization. And then accessibility, can I find their phone number? Can I find their email? Can I find their home address? If I can, fire away. I'm a big proponent of cold calling. Get a letter out to them and follow up on that letter 8 to 10 times, 4 to 6 weeks. You'll get some breakthroughs.
James, to your point, I think there's the one thing that I see groups often do is forget that accessibility piece, meaning they'll find someone that seems to align with their mission, great capacity, but almost no access. And yet those individuals will be prioritized to others that might be attending a gala that they just had, which they might have lower capacity, but the access is there, the affinity is there. And so that's just one thing to be cognizant of and look out for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not everybody that approaches either of you that says we are thinking about a strategic development plan actually maybe want to do a strategic development plan. I have a feeling sometimes people ask questions because they're put up to it by board members or whatever. But and so you must face in this initial discussion process before you even engage in planning some degree of hesitancy and even reluctance. Is that true? And what are the reasons that that happens? James, you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one. I think one of the things I've noticed is usually when I have a client who is reluctant around strategic planning, whether they were put up to it by a board member or not, there's this question of a sense that it's risky, right? If things are going generally well, right? If I'm not, my job isn't being threatened, we're raising more money, things are generally trending in the right direction. It's hard to say, like, why would I do this? Because if I go spend this money and this time on doing a strategic development plan and we fail, then I've just put a target on my back, right? And so I think that's one of the pieces of hesitancy you can sometimes have. And then another one is sheer inertia, right? Things are going well. I don't want to rock the boat, right? I don't want to be no one's upset. No, let's just keep going the way that we're going now. I think those are generally the hesitancies that I find. And the unfortunate thing is that especially with the risk one, right? I don't want to put a target on my back. I think if you go through the strategic planning process the right way, and if you check in on it in the way that Jason was talking about, you're not putting a target. You're going to be putting a target on your back for praise, right? Because this sort of thing really does, if you check in on it regularly, if you do it with an aligned team that's all moving in the same direction, you're going to be able to achieve your landmark goals as long as they are, reasonable and all of those kind of things, but and grounded in reality.
I have a quick question here. Jackson J just put up a question. Is there a specific template for strategic planning for emerging new organizations to start with? Jackson, I don't know if if you think you can find a template somewhere. I'm not you're asking in that way, but that's the question. Any quick answer before we go ahead?
Quick answer, James. You mentioned the book "Playing to Win." I would
Yeah.
use that strategy, that book, as a template or a tool. I would also look at Harvard Business Review has lots of resources that you could lean in on. And yeah, anyways, that would be my quick response.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Definitely Playing to Win is a great book to read.
Quick ballpark information questions. James, how long does it take to do a plan? You're leading, you're doing the plan for Organization X. Yeah, how long does it take to hand one over at the end of the process?
Yeah. To get from start date to final playbooks delivered is typically about a 6-month process, 5 to 6 months usually.
Okay.
And if you go with me, it's 2 months.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
It's something to do with daylight savings in Arizona. I think that's good.
Right, that's right.
Jason, how long should a plan last? Is it 3 years? You hear 3 years, but I think James just mentioned a 5-year plan. So what's the common number, if there is one?
Yeah, we have really narrowed in on 3 to 5 years. We find that 3 years out, you can be pretty good at forecasting out and projecting where you will be in 3 years. 5 years is kind of the end of that spectrum where anything past 5 years, it kind of is a wild guess related to fundraising. I do think it's important for organizations to be dreaming, especially in the religious sphere and ministry space, be dreaming and thinking about what does that long-term vision look like for 10, 20 years out, because then your plans get to sit and nestle underneath each of those timeframes.
Yeah. I would just echo that and say, yes, this strategic plan that I mentioned earlier is a 5-year plan and it was successful. The checking in on it process had to be all the more intense, right? Because things change. Political environments change, macroeconomic environments change, all of that kind of stuff. Staff turnover is, much higher typically over a 5-year period than it's going to be over a 3-year period. I have a strong preference to keep it to 3. But in some cases it can work to go to 5.
The plans created, James, is it wise, preferable, does it matter to have a third party, maybe the same party that helped create the plan, to help oversee the plan's execution?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it depends on your development staff situation, right? So if you have a strong, high-performing development team that this plan is built with and will be enacted by, I think you're probably in a strong position. I think there are lots of ways that third parties can help, right? Mail vendors and major gift support and found grant writing and all of that kind of stuff. We can fit in many ways. I think the situations where you want a third party to come in and sort of steer the ship are ones where your development program is just not as built up, right? You don't have the staff, you don't have the staff expertise. And so that's a time when a third party like Amphil can step in and actually do that for you and run the plan for you.
I think we have about a minute left, and I want to ask Jason and then James, you could pile on. At its core is a strategic development plan the dictated wisdom of third-party consultants, or is it the collective determination of the nonprofit's own leadership?
Yeah. If it's the first, I think the organization is doomed to fail. And maybe the best way to answer that is it's a little bit of both, right? You hire a consultant so that you can glean their wisdom and expertise, but you also want a good consultant that is going to take the knowledge and expertise and just the contextual history that the organization has, and find that middle road in between.
Yeah,
James, any final? Yeah, go ahead.
I would agree with that. I think that, the third party should come in and help you facilitate the process, help you see your blind spots. But it's not Amphil's decisions in the strategic choice cascade, right? It's the organization's decisions.
Well, if you want to reach James Davenport, it's jdavenport@amphil.com, I think. Is that correct?
That's
And if you want
correct.
to reach Jason Lloyd, it's jlloyd@amphil.com. And Amphil is amphil.com. And the Center for Civil Society is centerforcivilsociety.org. So please check it out. We also, in addition to having the wonderful Civil Thoughts weekly newsletter, we also have Philanthropy Daily. Please do check that out. And hey, if you like to write, let me know. Maybe we'll publish you in Philanthropy Daily. Jason, James, I really deeply appreciate all the wisdom you shared today. I have to believe it's been helpful to folks. I want to thank Jacob Bucko, who has helped engineer this webinar. So thanks very much, all. Thanks for attending, and we'll be back soon with another Center for Civil Society webinar. I should know which one is coming up next month. I don't, but check out our website. Thanks very much. God bless all.
Thank you all.